Welcome to our Meet the Experts Composers panel. We are joined by Daniel Pemberton from Being the Ricardos, Robert Aiki Aubrey Lowe from Candyman, Germaine Franco from Encanto, Carter Burwell from The Tragedy of Macbeth, and Nicholas Britell from Don't Look Up. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've talked a lot about writing music, but I want to ask about recording and being in the studio, or maybe virtually now because of COVID. I'm assuming most, if not all of you, had to record these current projects virtually. So what has that been like? And what do you like about the recording process in general? Like, how much experimentation do you do when you're in there? Daniel, let's start with you.
This weirdly was probably the most traditional score I've recorded for a very long time, in that it was all about the orchestra in the room and no overdubs. I spend normally gazillions of hours doing very intricate overdubs and texture elements that no one probably notices in the final mix. But with Ricardos, I wanted to sound like an old, big orchestral record. So we got 70 people in the room, and we got super lucky because I got to go there, and it was just fantastic being back in the room with loads of people. And COVID restrictions had just changed in Britain, so we could get 70 people. And if we couldn't do that, I would be probably not chatting to you now, because the whole school basically needed that element of everyone at the same time. So I basically got very lucky. And it's really nice just to do huge orchestral stuff, because I'm often trying to do quite weird electronics or stuff that I don't really know if it's going to work. And with that, I'm like, lots of people have tried this before. It's a good system. So yeah, it's great.
Mm-hmm. Everyone back in the same room again. So,
but I didn't get to be in the filmmakers, which sucked. So I spent the whole time in this room doing Zoom calls like this with editors and directors and music editors.
Yeah, definitely. Germaine, what about you?
Well, I started out during the pandemic, and so it was difficult to get in the room with the filmmakers. All the calls were the same. I'm sure everybody has that, when you're want to get a cue across to filmmakers and you don't know what they're listening on. So that was definitely, a challenge, just getting the technology to work in terms of everybody getting their own personal computers to work. So when you're playing a cue, that they're hearing what you would like them to hear. But then I lucked out too that in May, once the vaccines came, we were able to meet in person. And then all my sessions were done in person, but by sections. Like, we weren't able to have the woodwinds in the same room as the strings. We did have a COVID scare one day. We had a whole session shut down because one string player was exposed, and that was pretty chaotic in the sense that we were wondering, are we going to get another session the next day? But Disney was fantastic, and we were at Fox for literally 3.5 weeks, recording for a really long time. 7 Latin percussionists, a rhythm section, choir. We did at Warner Brothers. That we had restrictions. We had hoped to have 30 singers, but we got 22 with Edie Lehman-Boddicker conducting. Everybody was wearing masks. There were restrictions, but we made it through before it got too bad. But it was excellent being in the room, as everyone knows, after, a 1.5 years of working alone.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's incredible. Carter, what about you?
Well, I have to say I tried as hard as I could to make this a score for just strings, because I figured they could wear masks and it would make the whole thing more doable. And we recorded in March of 2021, so it was still, pretty pandemic. A lot of people weren't vaccinated yet. But in the end, it is Macbeth, and it does have battle scenes, and I did in the end need some brass, and we just had a huge room and put 6 brass players 20 feet apart with, gobos in between them, and the air moving all the time. And anyway, we managed to get it done. But it's true, right now you need all this support from the studio, from people to bring in COVID testing on site. And it's asking a lot of everybody. Where I was conducting, I'm wearing a mask the whole time, and I'm wearing a mask in the control room. All the engineers are wearing masks. Everyone's getting tested. but we're also requiring a lot of the studios to, because it's very expensive. But I'm happy to say, so far my experience is everyone's stepping up. The musicians are, of course, happy to be working. I'm happy to be working. The studios are doing their part. So it is amazingly, it's coming along. I hate, to really answer your original question, I do hate remote recording. I like to be there in the room with the players, chat with them, find out, if they've got suggestions about their part, or in this case, I was working with this violinist that Nick works with a lot, Tim Fain, and that one-on-one like conversation and just being face-to-face, so important. You can't do that over a technology. I don't, or anyway,
Yeah,
not to
for
my
sure.
satisfaction.
Nick?
I agree with Carter. I mean, I think it's, there's nothing like that joy of being in the room with the musicians, and the collaborative process, I think, is what probably attracts all of us to doing film music in general. It's this like real team approach, which is so wonderful. And I think it's heightened, in those moments with an orchestra, or even if it's just a smaller group, you have those conversations, you figure things out, you try things a different way. I have done this all remotely lately for a while now, unfortunately. I would say the one benefit, if there is one, is the technology is incredible. You all may have used this Audio Movers program, but basically you hear exactly what's coming through the mixing board in the studio, no matter where you are. So if I'm here in New York, we did all the Don't Look Up recordings at Air in London. And so you're hearing everything. And the one benefit maybe is you're hearing what you're doing on your sort of speakers. So I think in some ways, maybe that speeds up the mixing process to some extent, because right away if it's how it's going to sound, sometimes I feel it's almost intoxicating when you're conducting a group, because you're like, this sounded amazing. And then you go and you're like, well, maybe is this the right sound? But you're out there and it feels so great. I think so that's one small benefit maybe, but I miss being there, and all the musicians did such incredible work, but it is so much more complicated, like everybody's saying. And we did orchestra in the hall, strings, and then the big band there as well.
Mm-hmm. Robert, what about you?
Well, for this film in particular, there wasn't a lot that was actually done during the pandemic. I had completed a good portion of the film by the time that the pandemic hit and lockdown started to happen, because I started working on the film. I was brought on officially and started working on things in August of 2019. So I was taking a really long stretch with this and really trying to build the complexity of the score. So really taking time with it. So any of the in-person sessions I had with players were done before the pandemic. And so it was basically down to when I started putting the final touches on the recordings and arrangements, it was just myself and my engineer and co-producer Randall Dunn in the studio at the desk, going through the compositions, looking at that point, we had picture, because I started before Nia had even started shooting, before they had even finished casting. Like the main theme of the film, I had written the core of that piece. She had that in August of 2019.
Wow, looked out there.
So I didn't really, it wasn't really that much of a difference for me in that situation, because a majority of the score was performed by me. And then certain instruments, my score assistant and collaborator Matthew Morandi played the contrabass, Hilder did voice and cello, and everything else I played or sang. Mm-hmm. So.
How has technology changed the way you worked? Daniel, you were mentioning this before, so let's start with you.
I mean, technology is amazing and horrible. Like, I think I get very jealous of the fact that composers used to just write a theme or write the score, and that would kind of be it. And the director would, not experience that till they got on the stage. And I think there's definitely benefits and drawbacks of that, depending on which side of the fence you're on. But I totally understand why now we've got to a culture of micro managing, which I think technology allows, and you can do amazing work. But I think sometimes we're all slightly slave to the mock-up and the, you know, it's the constant dilemma of a film composer. I think it's like, how do you create great music through this system of writing, which is different to sometimes actual musicality. I don't know if you all find that, like, you know, even just chatting earlier to Robert about his modular system, it's like doing something crazy on that, but then you have to put it through some way of getting it through to the directors and the editors, who will then send you back notes. And I think technology has meant everyone can tweak constantly, and so they expect everything to be tweaked. And it's trying to find, I'm always trying to find, how do I circumvent that part of the process that allows me to be a bit freer and experimental, but still deal with notes and changes and picture changes and scene changes and emotional changes.
Sure. Nick, you were just talking about that program you used to play back music.
Yeah, Audio Movers has been incredible, and something that even a few years ago, I don't think would have been possible in that way, to experience the music in literally real time at that high fidelity. I know exactly what you're saying, but it's also, I think the pro of tech, I think, is that there are sounds that are possible that I think just, the fact that, we can sit in our little rooms and play with these filters and weird plugins, and you can take a French horn and you can turn it into like an alien texture if you want, with a button, and I think there's, I think it's also a balance of time management sometimes for me, because I'm sort of like, there's so much that we all have to do in usually pretty limited periods of time. And so there's that extra, I'm always trying to make sure that I give myself the window to say, you know what, I know I have to finish this, but I'm going to take like 3 minutes and just play with that sound. Just, because I feel it's sometimes those extra like 90 seconds that I give myself that opens up like a whole new idea or something. And so I'm always trying to make sure I do that, because I feel if I don't do that, there's these sort of worlds of ideas or possibilities that sometimes I might close myself off to. So, but I find, I think on a creative level, on just a pure compositional level, I think the technology is pretty incredible.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not.
I know you like technology, Daniel.
I love technology. My career would not exist by any stretch without technology.
So I'd say the same thing.
No technology.
We need technology, especially now during COVID. So,
I mean, I'll just say, I'll echo what Nick said, that the schedules we work under, like to try to come up with an entire score in 6 weeks without this technology. And I guess people used to do it, but without a room full of people helping you, I just don't see how it was possible. And I wouldn't be able to do this without what we have. And it is amazing. I think also the technology that we have allows people who, for instance, aren't conservatory trained to enter this business, which was not possible 30, 40 years ago. And that I wouldn't be here without that. That's right. And a lot of these composers that we're, like Hans and Johnny, we were talking about earlier, they wouldn't be here without that, right? I think that it has allowed new voices and new sounds in, which I think is great.
Mm-hmm. And Germaine, what about you?
Well, I use technology obviously every day the same way everyone here does. And I tend to want to start with the acoustic instruments and just work on my piano and then come up with some melodic and harmonic motifs and stuff. And then I go to the technology. I don't usually start writing to picture, but I mean, without technology, we couldn't have worked on any of these projects during the pandemic. And yes, Audio Movers, I even used it for my presentations. So I wouldn't use the audio through Zoom. I would give the executives an Audio Mover link. but that also has to work. So there's more levels of complexity. So I think what Daniel was saying was that, yeah, there is a tendency, because we have so much technology, that all of our demos need to sound like fully, orchestrated. The orchestra is sounding fantastic with, oh, it's Abbey Road strings. And, that's really the trend. And we have to, to meet that. And sometimes you get executives who do say, oh, keep working on that. On one of my cues where Antonio's writing the Jaguar, I said, I can't demo this with technology. I need human voices. I need the choir. I had a choir in Colombia. I said, this sound, I can't even get the session singers here because it's a type of singing they only do in Colombia. So technology can take us to a certain place, but then the humanity of the players and the singers, I think, gives it that kind of exquisite human feeling. And it's a mix of two. It's the hybrid score that we're hearing so much these days.
As far as the concept of technology, I think these are just tools we have, and it's the utilization of those tools that is the most important thing. As far as, the idea of delivering things in a more expedient way, I mean, for me, it's more important to have a clear communication with the filmmaker on the front end of it, and to be able to communicate with each other and have a dialogue to understand what needs to happen. And then it's less about, for me at least, it's less about demoing things and more about having a conversation, putting something in place, and then, after that, sort of picking apart, like fine tuning whatever needs to be done, but the core of it is there. And I think that is an organic process, and just the communication is the most important thing. And I think, technology is just a tool.
Mm-hmm. Well, I could speak to all of you all day, but I know you guys have to go. So thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on all your films, and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Right, see you all later somewhere.